Happy Saturday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. And we start off with a particularly noteworthy development. Has China's economy reached a critical threshold? Well, that's what some are arguing this week, in a development which seemed almost unimaginable just a few years ago. China's long-term bond yields have fallen below Japan's for the first time ever. This unprecedented yield crossover underscores the growing economic uncertainty in China, as well as broader economic struggle as Beijing battles stagnation reminiscent of Japan's prolonged deflationary period in the 1990s. Yields on 30-year Chinese government bonds have dropped from 4% in late 2020 to 2.21% as of this week, a decline driven by Beijing's aggressive interest rate cuts to revive its economy. Meanwhile, Japan's long-term bond yields, long suppressed by deflation, have risen to 2.7% as the country normalizes its monetary policies. Investors have increasingly turned to Chinese government bonds as a haven asset, yet some believe that deflation has become deeply entrenched in the Chinese economy. Analysts like John Woods, Asia Chief Investment Officer at Lombard Odier, suggest that the downward trajectory of yields may persist, reflecting the challenges of combating deflation through monetary and fiscal measures alone. UK-based The Financial Times writes that the parallels between China's current situation and Japan's economic stagnation in the 1990s are striking. The bursting of China's real estate bubble has left its economy vulnerable, with core inflation, excluding food and fuel, at a meager 0.2% in October. Chinese policymakers are actively working to counter this downward pressure. The Financial Times writes that, quote, Beijing has long fought against the Japanification of the economy and has made huge investments in its high-tech, green and electric vehicle sectors with the goal of boosting long-term growth, end quote. Peking University professor of finance Michael Pettis pushes back against this explanation, however, arguing in a post today, quote, some analysts claim that the main difference between China today and Japan in the late 1980s and 1990s is China's high-tech growth strategy, which Japan doesn't have. This claim can only be taken seriously by those who know very little about Japan in the late 1980s and 1990s. At the time, Japan dominated so many high-tech industries in nearly all the fastest-growing high-tech consumer industries, and many, if not most analysts believe that Japan would overtake the US technologically within a decade or two. This, by the way, was also what most analysts believed about the USSR in the early 1960s. They were wrong both times. The point, perhaps, is that most massive investment in high-tech sectors doesn't guarantee long-term sustainable growth. It is only when there is a mechanism to ensure that the investment generates greater economic value than it absorbs, typically the role of hard budget constraints, that it leads to longer-term sustainable growth. Without that mechanism, however, when losses are automatically socialized, more investment will often come at the expense of domestic demand and so, ironically, will be even more deflationary. In the end, only a relative rise in consumption will prevent the Japanification of China, not more subsidies to production, end quote. Whatever is the case with the bond development, what we do know is that the market is increasingly pessimistic about the Chinese economy. Despite launching the largest monetary stimulus since COVID-19 and a 10 trillion yuan, $1.4 trillion US dollar fiscal package, domestic investors remain cautious. They continue to shy away from China's battered equity and property markets, further depressing bond yields. Analysts argue that significant policy shifts are necessary to change this trajectory. Andrew Pierce, chief investment strategist at Russell Investments, asserts that boosting domestic consumption and reducing investment reliance will be critical to overcoming deflationary pressures. A challenging task for Beijing amid current economic headwinds, especially considering it has been trying, unsuccessfully, to do this for years now. Meanwhile, and speaking of bonds, yesterday, Friday, the People's Bank of China expanded its cash injection into the banking system, providing 800 billion yuan, $111 billion US dollars, via reverse repurchase agreements. This move aims to ensure adequate liquidity amid a surge in local government bond sales and rising funding pressures. The contracts, spanning 3 months, are part of a broader effort to maintain so-called reasonably ample liquidity, according to a People's Bank of China statement. Additionally, the central bank purchased 200 billion yuan in sovereign bonds from dealers further boosting the cash supply. These measures support banks, which are absorbing increased debt issuance from China's 10 trillion yuan program to address off-balance sheet local government debt, while continuing to lend to businesses and consumers. Regular viewers of China Update will know that China's banks' profitability is under tremendous, indeed historic pressure. As liquidity demands intensify, especially with 2.4 trillion yuan in medium-term loans maturing in December and January, the People's Bank of China may further ease monetary policy. Market analysts, including Becky Liu of Standard Chartered, expect additional RRR cuts and potentially lower interest rates once pressures on the currency ease. Next up, according to Chinese state media, yesterday, Friday, China and Russia conducted their 9th Joint Strategic Air Patrol on, quote, showcasing advanced capabilities as China's H-6N bombers debuted over the Sea of Japan. End quote. State-run The Global Times writes that this marks a milestone for the Chinese People's Liberation Army Air Force, as the N6N, which is capable of mid-air refueling, quote, extends the range and deterrence scope of the patrol, end quote. The H6N, first unveiled during China's 2019 National Day military parade, has been upgraded with advanced weapons and technology, making it the PLA Air Force's most advanced bomber. A Chinese J-16 fighter jet escorted two H-6Ns alongside a Russian Tu-95 bomber during the patrol. Chinese experts noted the patrol's, quote, demonstration of high-level strategic trust, enhanced intelligence sharing, and joint combat readiness between the two nations, end quote. South Korea's military said it launched its own fighter jets after what it says was 11 Chinese and Russian military aircraft entered the country's air defense identification zone. The aircraft lingered over a period of 4 hours before exiting without incident, according to the South Koreans. South Korea has protested to China and Russia that the air patrol was conducted without notice. In July, both militaries, that is the Russians and the Chinese, conducted a joint air patrol using nuclear-capable strategic bombers near the U.S. state of Alaska in the North Pacific and Arctic, prompting the United States and Canada to scramble fighter jets. Next up, we have one more development to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, as always, I have a big favor to ask. If you do like the content, that is just to hit the like button, subscribe if you have not done so already, and share this episode with someone who you think would get some value from it. These are tremendous helps for the channel. It's good for the algorithm. It means the channel can grow. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description for those who want to go the extra mile and help keep China Update financially sustainable. Thank you so much. And finally for today, the sustainability of domestic pension systems is an issue facing many societies, including some of the world's wealthiest. However, the situation in China is especially, almost categorically, worse. Recently, Yi Fuxian, Chinese-born US-based expert demographer and China commentator, published a long report arguing that as China's shrinking workforce slows economic growth and reduces government revenues, the rapidly growing elderly population is driving up pension spending. Quote, given the severity of its demographic crisis, China will need to keep raising its retirement age, potentially fueling civil unrest and political instability. End quote. Now we end today's video by examining some of this report. China's decision to gradually raise the retirement age marks a long overdue acknowledgement of its looming demographic challenges. Under the new policy, phased over 15 years, retirement will increase from 60 to 63 for men, 55 to 58 for white-collar women, and 50 to 55 for blue-collar women. However, he argues that these modest changes merely delay confronting a deepening aging crisis. China's retirement age, unchanged since 1955, was set when the median age was 21 and just 7% of the population was over 60. Today, life expectancy has surged from 47 years in 1955 to 79 in 2022, and 21% of the population, 282 million people, are now over 60. This figure is expected to reach 475 million, or nearly half of the population, by 2050. The resulting pension costs are skyrocketing, with spending rising from 1.5% of household disposable income in 1990 to 12% in 2022. Many provinces face deficits, relying on central government support. He writes that despite growing fiscal pressure, policymakers delayed action for decades, citing fears of unemployment and public unrest. These concerns, along with what he calls exaggerated fears of overpopulation, shaped policies like the controversial one-child rule, which has left an aging population dependent on a shrinking workforce. China's pension system also highlights stark inequalities, he argues. Rural retirees who receive as little as $30 per month depend on government aid, while government employees enjoy pensions exceeding $900 monthly. Such disparities, coupled with a fertility rate of just 1.0 in 2023, far below replacement levels, compound the urgency for reform. Globally, countries like the US and UK have implemented more aggressive measures, raising retirement ages to 67 and beyond despite public backlash. In contrast, China's incremental approach risks falling short as the worker-to-retiree ratio drops from 11 to 1 in 1980 to a projected 1.5 to 1 by 2050. China must confront its demographic reality with bolder reforms, he argues, such as higher retirement ages and systemic pension restructuring. Without these measures, the country faces economic slowdown, pension insolvency, and potential political instability, leaving future generations to bear the burden of today's inaction. Now, on this theme of the aging crisis in China, L.C. Lee, a fellow on Chinese economy at the Asia Society Policy Institute's Center for China Analysis, published a piece this week in US-based Foreign Policy called "Xi Jinping Doesn't Have an Answer for China's Demographic Crisis. A call for a high-quality population ignores the country's real problems." It's a very good piece, and I was thinking of doing a special episode tomorrow, like reading through the episode, so let me know if you'd like to hear that. If there is enough demand, I'll do an extra episode for the Sunday. Now, I've also been thinking of only publishing weekend episodes of China Update for members and Patreon supporters. On the one hand, this would be an extra treat for those who financially support the channel and help with the financial needs of the channel. On the other hand, I understand that for many they cannot afford to support the channel, but they support the channel in other ways by liking and sharing and have been with the channel for some time. And I don't like the idea of restricting videos from regular viewers. So I'm still not quite sure what to do. I would very much like to hear your thoughts on this. I'll take your thoughts as my primary consideration. Ultimately, I want to have all episodes free and open for all. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. But that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Saturday. Have a restful weekend. I will either see you tomorrow. If not, I will see you all for a new week of China Update on Monday.